ඉතින් මේ පාසුන් නෑ වෙලා සිමෙන්ති පොළේ වෙන්න. නැත්තම් අද බඩ කිට්ටේනේ.
For months now, Sri Lankans have been standing in line for various reasons. Is this due to poor management or a different reason entirely? A very good evening and welcome to Primetime News on TV1, where we report and you decide. Here a look at your headlines for tonight.
News First Headlines. Main sponsor.
Valuable Finance, best finance company.
7.5-hour blackout tomorrow. Diesel shortage worsens. People forced to wait in line for hours. Compensation for damaged crops following fertilizer saga. Counter-terror legislation should not restrict freedom of expression. GL tells UN Human Rights Council. 40-mile convoy of Russian forces bearing down on Kyiv. World Taekwondo revokes Putin's honorary black belt over Ukraine.
In your top story, the Public Utilities Commission of Sri Lanka has granted approval to disrupt the supply of electricity across the country for 7.5 hours tomorrow. PUCSL Chairman Janaka Ratnayaka elaborated on the power cuts at a media briefing in Colombo.
A large number of power plants are not active due to the non-availability of fuel. Therefore, we will be compelled to impose lengthy power cuts tomorrow. A power cut of 5 hours will be imposed during the day between 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. and 2.5 hours in the evening between 6 p.m. and 11 p.m. This will be a 7.5-hour power cut. The PUCSL granted approval to the CEB for the power cuts. We have no other alternative. For more than a month, we informed the authorities, the cabinet and the political hierarchy on the need to solve this issue. Yet, we did not receive any positive response. That is why we cannot source the required stocks of fuel for electricity generation.
What is the situation of the fuel crisis?
Power plants and filling stations have been running out of fuel in the country. This has affected the transport, agriculture, fisheries and industrial sectors. People who spend their day in queues to purchase essential goods are now spending their night in queues for fuel. People at the Kurunegala town have been standing in queues to purchase fuel since last night.
දැන් අහන්න තියන්නේ ගෝඨාභය මහත්තයාගෙන් බැසිල් මහත්තයාගෙන් මහින්ද මහත්තයාගෙන් සැපත කියලා. ඇත්තම මේ වේදනාවෙන් මේ කියන්නේ තෙල් ටික නැතුව. ඇත්තමයි මහත්තයෝ මේ. අපි යකඩ එක් කරන්නේ මහත්තයෝ. මේක මහත්තයා මුළු ලෝකෙටම පෙන්නන්න. ලංකාවේ සෙට් එකේ තෙල් ගහන්න ඇවිල්ලා පොලිමේ ඉඳලා බත් කට කන්නේ මේ ඈ. ඕ. කාලනි පාලනේ මේක අයින් කරන්න ඕනේ. එක්ක නැත්තම් මුන්ට බැයි නම් මේක කරන්න පුළුවන් කෙනෙකු දීලා යන්න. නැත්තම් හොරා කාපු සල්ලි මුන් ගෙනල්ලා එක්ක මේක යථා තත්ත්වයකට පත් කරලා හිටන් ඊට පස්සේ ඒ සල්ලි මුන්ට ගන්න පුළුවන් නේ. අද පුදියන හරි ඉන්නවද ඩීසල් එක. ඉතින් හිතුවද අපි වැඩ කරගන්න යන්නේ නැහැ අපිට.
People in this queue received diesel at 6 a.m. But the sale of fuel was halted as people started gathering to purchase them in cans. A long queue was seen at 10 this morning after the supply of fuel was restricted.
ඩීසල් නෑ. එනවා කන්දේ ළඟ පාර.
A fuel station at the Kabithigollava town received diesel after 2 days. Most people in queues were farmers. They had gathered here at around 7 a.m. after being informed that diesel would be sold. The next fuel station in the area is 30 kilometers away. The maximum purchasing limit of diesel was fixed at 2,000 rupees. Vehicles in Alla had to stop mid-journey while carrying tourists.
ගෝඨාභය මහත්තයා මිනිස්සු ටික පාරට ගෙනල්ලා පෝලිම් වල ඉන්නවා බොහොම සතුටයි අපි තමයි හොඳටම කෙරුවේ මේ ආණ්ඩුවට ගෝඨා මතද අවුරුදු 3ක් අපි දීර්ඝ කළ දෙමු මේ සැප පට්ටාත සංචාරකයන් ඩොලර් නෑ කියන ඩොලර් එනකොට ඩොලර් ටික ගන්න මේකට උනන්දු වන්න සුද්ධොත් මග අපිත් මග වාහනත් මග ඉතින් කරන්න දෙයක් නෑ ඉතින්.
Long queues for fuel were seen at a fuel station in Chilao.
සෞභාග්‍ය දක්වනවා පේන්නේ මේ පොලිම වාහන පොලිම කිලෝමීටර් 2ක් විතර තියෙනවා අපිත් ඡන්ද දුන්නා තමයි කාලකන් නියත්ත උන්ට හෙන ගන්නවා.
Diesel stocks ran out in half an hour after sales began at 7 this morning.
දැන් තෙල් නෑ කියලා වල රස්සාවක් නෑ ඔක්කොම ඉවරයි. අපි හෙට ඉඳලා පස් තමයි ගන්න වෙන්නේ මේ පොළවේ.
Our correspondents visited 6 fuel stations between Kalutara and Panadura. 3 fuel stations remained closed. 1 fuel station sold only diesel. Stocks were released only for government vehicles. Some fuel stations had run out of petrol. Long queues of people were seen at the Hatton town this morning. The fuel station in Sevagano in Polonnaruwa was closed as it ran out of fuel. Long queues were seen at the Yatyantara town today. Our correspondent reported that fuel stations had run out of fuel 5 days ago. Diesel wasn't sold at fuel stations in Imaduwa and Gaul.
අපි හිඟා කනෝනේ වඩු පුට්ටුවක් ගන්න නෑ රස්සාවක් කරගන්න නෑ අපි කොයි රස්සාවක් කරන්නේ මේක
සල්ලි නැත්නම් අපි සල්ලි දිනවනේ තෙල් ගහන්නේ කෝ තෙල් ඇවිල්ලත් තෙල් දෙන්නේ නැහැ සිමෙන්ති පොලිමේ ඉන්නවා දැන් පෙට්‍රල් පොලිමේ ඉන්නවා හැමදාම කරන්න බෑ මේ වැඩි ඉතින් මේ කට්ටියට කරන්න බැරි නම් මෙලා අයින් වෙන්න ඕන ඡන්දේ දුන්නා අපි ලැජ්ජ වෙනවා ඡන්දේ දුන්නේ මේ වගේ මිනිස්සුන්ටද කියලා.
The 3 fuel stations at the Mavanella town had run out of diesel. Diesel was not sold at an IOC fuel station as well.
ඉස්කෝල මාස ගණන් නැති වෙලා තමයි දැන් අපිට මේ වෙලා තියෙන්නේ ඒත් දැන් රස්සාවක් කරගන්න බැරි තත්ත්වයක් තියෙනවා අපි අතේන 5000 ගොල්ල තියෙනවා ඒක ජනාධිපති තමයි නැති කරලා තියෙන්නේ පොලිමේ රවටන්නේ අපි හැමදාම නෑ මහජනය මරණක් තවන්න මේ මිනිස්සු සැප විඳිනවා.
The situation in Colombo is not so different. Many fuel stations had run out of diesel. People had to buy fuel after waiting in queues for several hours.
මොකටද අපි ඇමතිවරුපත් කරේ කරුවලේ ඉන්නද ඇපල් කන්නද එහෙම එකක් මේ සාමාන්‍ය ඇපල් විකුණන මිනිහා කියවුණා නම් ඒකට උත්තරේ හරියට දෙයි වෙනස් තියෙනවා කොහොමද නඩත්තු කරන්නේ ඉතින් නවත්තලා ගෙදර තියන්නද ආණ්ඩුත් දැකලා තියෙනවා මේ වගේ කාලකන්ණි ආණ්ඩුවක් නම් දැකලා නැහැ
මාර දුකක් විදිහේ මේ වගේ ආණ්ඩුව ඇත්තටම වැඩක් නැහැ.
Will public transport come to a standstill?
18,000 buses usually operate in Sri Lanka on a daily basis. There was a 50% drop yesterday. We demanded this so-called accountable government to immediately issue fuel to private buses, or else we would have no other option but to completely suspend the operations of these 18,000 buses on Sri Lankan roads. There are only 4,000 private buses that are currently operating on Sri Lankan roads. Private bus owners as a whole incur a loss of approximately 100 million rupees daily. Who will be held accountable for this? We can carry out our operations only if we receive diesel tomorrow. We will not only be able to carry out our operations, our entire transportation system will come to a standstill if we do not get diesel tomorrow.
Trade unions say that trains have fuel stock sufficient for only 3 days. Secretary to the Locomotive Engineering Operators Union, Indika Dodangoda, stated that they have requested authorities to limit train operations due to the prevailing situation. Will Sri Lanka receive fuel tomorrow?
The Energy Ministry's Secretary KDR Olga says fuel tankers are to reach Sri Lanka tomorrow night and on Thursday. One tanker will be carrying 33,000 metric tons of diesel and 7,000 metric tons of super diesel. The other ship will be carrying 28,000 metric tons of diesel.
Will Sri Lanka receive fuel even after the ships arrive?
Sri Lanka must make payments in dollars to unload the fuel consignments from those ships. Energy Minister Udaya Gammampila had informed the Cabinet on the 27th of December last year that any supplier had not agreed to supply fuel on a long term with a relief period to make payments. He had said overseas banks are rejecting letters of credit issued by Sri Lankan banks as the country's credit ratings were downgraded by rating agencies. As a result, Sri Lanka is now relying on spot purchases to purchase fuel. However, there are contradictory sides to this story. The Cabinet had granted approval to award a long-term contract for fuel purchases when the Energy Minister had informed that no supplier was ready to sell fuel on credit. Spot purchases for fuel are being made from the company that was awarded the long-term fuel supply tender. They are purchasing fuel from Vitol, which holds a long-term supply contract. As a result of making emergency purchases, they have had to pay demurrage of more than $1.5 million. They have paid more than $600,000 to a ship in 2 months. They are wasting the people's money. Although the government had said that it wouldn't be able to purchase fuel by awarding a long-term tender, the Cabinet yesterday granted approval to award a long-term tender to UAE-based MSOQ Trading Limited. This was to supply fuel for 8 months since the 15th of February. This is why the people have been criticizing the government of expressing contradictory views.
What is going to happen next?
Sri Lanka is to receive a $500 million credit line from India to purchase fuel from the end of March to the end of April. However, the condition is that the fuel will have to be purchased from India. The Indian Oil Corporation has already increased fuel prices in a move that has impacted the local market. The Ceylon Petroleum Corporation has imported a barrel of crude oil at $93. That means a litre of petrol or diesel would ideally cost 118 rupees. The IOC increased the price from 177 rupees to 184 rupees on the 6th of February. Last Friday, they increased it further by 20 rupees. They made it 204 rupees. The Indian Oil Corporation is charging 204 rupees for a litre of petrol that can be sold at 129 rupees. The government that came to chase the LIOC away is now silent. If the problem is the shortage of dollars, will increasing fuel prices solve the problem? Please stop IOC from increasing fuel prices. If they don't request for permission, their license can be cancelled. The Energy Minister has allowed them to pillage the people. The CPC has cut down supplies by half. This has forced people to go to the IOC. The Lankan Indian Oil Company is now amassing profits when the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation is in limbo, as there are no dollars or suppliers who can sell fuel on credit. Even if Sri Lanka imports fuel from India from the end of March until April, does it mean the people will have to continue their wait in queues after that? Otherwise, will Sri Lanka's energy market fall into India's control? Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is expected to attend the BIMSTEC summit in Sri Lanka on the 31st of March. Finance Minister Basil Rajapaksa is also making plans to visit India before that. Sri Lanka has already requested India for a credit line to import essential items such as food and medicines. The people have now understood the reality. The government settled a $500 million international sovereign bond in January, despite being aware of a looming crisis. As economic experts insisted to avoid settling the ISB, the government was accused of going ahead with the repayment as it would benefit some entities. Will the people be standing in queues if the $500 million international sovereign bond was not settled? While people continue to fall into a deeper crisis by the day, with a limited group continuing to earn profits, will Sri Lanka's energy market fall into the hands of a foreign nation?
In the midst of a fuel and electricity crisis, one family is now rendered homeless under unfortunate circumstances. This is VK Madanayaka, Since the 26th of February, Madanayaka, his wife and 2 kids have been living next to the Bera Lake in Colombo. Madanayaka was employed at a coir factory in Varakapula while living in a renter house in the area and thereafter moved to his ancestral home in Ambepusa after his only brother succumbed to COVID-19. However, they were unable to live in that house for long.
We are doubtful over his brother's death. We took custody of the body and after performing the final rite, we returned home only to find that the house was locked. We filed a complaint with the police stating that the house was locked by a monk when we were the ones with the keys. Thereafter, we forced our way into the house. On the 19th, the monk came and asked us if we choose intimidation or the law. I responded that we chose the law. The monk also produced a deed while we were in possession of a deed. Thereafter, on the 19th of January, the house went to the monk. We are helpless with our 2 children.
His brother donated that property to the Sangha for a home for the elders to be constructed in memory of his late mother. I was prepared to do that. Then this person forced his way into the house. Then I went to court and the court ruled that he produced a fake deed and ordered them to vacate.
News First Headlines. Main sponsor.
Valuable Finance, best finance company.
Sri Lankan farmers have been severely affected by prolonged issues that have rendered them helpless. Today, News First visited them, and here is what they had to say.
The fertilizer crisis. These are the repercussions of taking ad hoc decisions to ban chemical fertilizer from Sri Lanka. Farmers harvesting this Maha season will bear witness to these serious repercussions. This is Sungavila Devagodalla in Polonnaruwa. The fuel crisis. Farmers say the remainder of their crops will be destroyed if they are unable to reap their harvest before the rains begin. However, farmers say they don't have diesel to fuel their tractors to reap the harvest.
We have to protect our farmlands against elephant attacks during night time. They attacked a few farmlands last night as well as the day before. When we approach individuals who own machines, they tell us to bring diesel and they'll harvest our fields for us. We farmed all the lands we could get a hold of. Now we are left desperate for help. We only have God to look up to now.
The human-elephant conflict. Farmers go through so much just to reap their harvest. The next big problem is how are they going to protect this from elephants? Wild elephants are now encroaching into villages because it's the harvesting season. A 54-year-old farmer drew his last breath after an elephant attack last evening in Palliyagodalla area in Madirigiriya in Polonnaruwa. A 50-year-old person was also killed after an elephant attack on the riverbank Polonnaruwa yesterday. A death was recorded due to a wild elephant attack in Navodagama in Tantirimale 2 days ago. Yet another death was recorded on the 26th in Aliyapattuwa in Anuradhapura. The latest solution given to the fertilizer crisis.
We will pay 50,000 rupees each for 1.1 million farmers who cultivated in 800,000 hectares during the Maha cultivation season. We are purchasing a kilogram of rice for 90, 92 and 95 rupees. We have given rice a good price. We have paid compensation for the farmers. Farmers who engaged in cultivation activities during the Maha season have not been abandoned.
The Cabinet of Ministers yesterday decided to permit the importation of muriate of potash or potassium chloride fertilizer for Yala season paddy cultivation. The Government Information Department said it has been estimated that about 38,500 metric tons of muriate of potash fertilizer will be required. The farmers' response. A conference was organized by the farmers of Anuradhapura district recently. During the conference, farmers reiterated that the farming community must unite together instead of blindly following political parties.
We will stand against the corrupt policies of this government's politicians and their henchmen. Support us in standing by what's right by us. The upcoming Yalla season is a trying time. We used to receive about 130 sacks from an acre. Now we receive only 30 to 40. I challenge Mahindananda, the President and the Prime Minister. There are 3.5 to 4 million farmers in the country. Let's see what happens when the next election comes. Be very aware. We the farmers will decide who will represent us from Anuradhapura at the next election, who will represent our needs in Parliament as well as the local Parliament. Don't allow party politics to divide us at the next election. Whoever comes to rule us, we will not take part in party politics. Let's see what they include in their policies this time around. We demand answers. We will make our demands. We will only elect the person who agrees to meet our demands. We harvested 350 bundles last season, but this time we received only 100. There is barely a harvest this season. How can we believe them when they say that they'll pay us compensation? They haven't even paid the 12,500 they promised us yet. There is no way that we are going to believe them this time around. If the farmers in Anuradhapura and Polonnaruwa organize a joint May Day rally, not only this government but all politicians in this district will have to bow down to us.
Even if people switch from motorcycles to push cycles, from lorries to bullock carts, how are people to travel if road conditions are unbearable? This is the only road linking to the Mahaoya, Ratupas Uhana, Perawal Talawa and Mahavatuyai villages in Ampara. What remains today are just remnants of what used to be a road. 500 families commute daily on this road to Mahaoya.
එනවා ඡන්දේ ඉල්ලන්නම් හැම කෙනාම එනවා හදලා දෙන්නම් කියනවා. තාම වෙනකන් නම් හදලා දුන්නේ නැහැ. නිකම්වත් පාරේ යන්න බෑ.
ආදිසිය අලියෙක් ආවා. එළවගෙන දුවගෙන මේ වලක කරනවා නම් අලියාට ඉස්සන් නිකම් ඇතිලනේ අපි මැරෙන්නේ. ඉතින් මේ අදාළ බල්දාරියෝ කීවට කිසිම දෙයක් සලකන්නේ නැහැ.
The road is only 2 kilometers long. However, villagers say that authorities are not keen on repairing this road.
More headline making news right after this short commercial break. Stay tuned.
Valuable Finance, best finance company.
Register today for a Zoom workshop on new technology in Sinhala.
Are we achieving the full potential of our creativity on the 3rd of March at 3 p.m.
Register via 0777 600 20.
Organized by Slit Institute.
Tech Bus.
Main sponsor.
Slit Knowledge University. Challenging convention and redefining education.
Welcome back to the news. In a developing story overseas, the Russian military has announced that it will carry out strikes against the facilities in Kyiv, warning civilians living near the areas to leave. The Russians will target the security service of Ukraine and the 72nd Main Center for Information and Psychology Operations in Kyiv.
Russia appears to have upped the ante in its invasion of Ukraine overnight, with satellite imagery indicating that a long convoy, some 40 miles or 65 kilometers long, of Russian military vehicles is heading towards Ukraine's capital Kyiv. Footage circulated on social media yesterday of reported shelling in a residential area in Kharkiv, Ukraine's second largest city of 1.4 million people. Several videos posted online showed a series of explosions in the city. Kharkiv is about 20 kilometers south of the border with Russia. The Ukrainian city has been targeted by an intensifying shelling campaign by Russian forces. A Ukrainian official says a Russian artillery attack on a military unit in a city between Kharkiv and Kyiv killed at least 70 Ukrainian soldiers yesterday. The Russian military has consistently denied targeting residential areas, despite abundant evidence of shelling of residential buildings, schools and hospitals. Until Sunday, Russia's troops had remained on the outskirts of Kharkiv, while other forces rolled past to press the offensive deeper into Ukraine. Meanwhile, the leader of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, has told state media that his forces will not join Russian troops in the invasion of Ukraine. Lukashenko, who is a close ally of Vladimir Putin, said that the Belarusian army isn't taking part in military action and never did. Google Europe announced this morning that it will block YouTube channels related to Russian state media outlets Sputnik and RT. It follows a similar move by Meta, the parent company of Facebook, which barred access to the two outlets across the EU. Japan is joining the US and other allies in slapping additional sanctions on Russia, including freezing assets of the country's leaders and 3 financial institutions, aside from those held by 6 individuals, including President Vladimir Putin and the Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Japan will freeze assets of 2 Russian state-owned banks as well as the country's central bank. Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison says his government will provide Ukraine with $50 million to help fend off the Russian invasion.
We will be committing $50 million to support both lethal and non-lethal defensive support for Ukraine. The overwhelming majority of that, that's some 70 million Australian dollars, will be in the lethal category.
Russia's defense minister said Russia will continue its so-called military operation in Ukraine until it achieves its goals. He said Moscow's main goal was protecting itself from threats created by the West, and claimed Russia was not occupying Ukraine's territory. Meanwhile, Russian Minister of Foreign Affairs Sergei Lavrov spoke at the UN Human Rights Council session.
There is irrefutable evidence of the criminal consequences of the heavy shelling of civilian sites in Donbass. A forensics medical examination has established that the majority of the dead were women and elderly people. People who consider themselves Russian and would like to preserve their identity, language and culture are told that they are strangers in Ukraine. Zelensky called them specimens and advised them to move away to Russia. The Russian language is banished from schools and universities, from the public sphere, from everyday life. Situations are not uncommon in which the right to speak your native language can cause you not only your job, health, but also your life.
Ukraine's president has described the bombardment of Kharkiv, which killed dozens of civilians, as a war crime.
The state which commits war crimes against civilians can't be a member of the Security Council. Such a state should be banned from entry to any ports, canals and airports across the world. Such a state should not receive hundreds of billions for export of energy resources. Purchasing Russian goods now means paying for killing of people.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed a special session of the European Parliament in Brussels. But ahead of his speech, there were powerful scenes as an ambassador for Ukraine received a standing ovation which lasted minutes. MEPs wore T-shirts decorated with the Ukrainian flag, while others held signs reading, "We stand with Ukraine."
Glory be to Ukraine.
Sri Lanka's Foreign Minister Professor G.L. Peiris is in Geneva for the 49th UN Human Rights Council session. Speaking at the high-level segment of the UNHRC, Professor Peiris noted that counter-terror legislation should not restrict freedom of expression.
Sri Lanka is convinced that counterterrorism legislation must secure and protect the rights of persons subject to investigation, detention and trial, and must not restrict democratic freedoms such as the freedom of expression. With these objectives in view, I recently presented a bill in the Parliament of Sri Lanka, which is an initial step in amending the Prevention of Terrorism Act 43 years after it was promulgated. Against this background, Sri Lanka once again reiterates its view that the evidence gathering mechanism established under Operative Para 6 of Resolution 46/1 is unhelpful to the people of Sri Lanka, will polarize Sri Lankan society and adversely affect economic development, peace and harmony in my country at a challenging time.
Samagi Janabalawege MPs Harin Fernando and Manushana Naikara left for Geneva this morning, where they are expected to make representation on behalf of incarcerated former parliamentarian Ranjan Ramanayaka. There is an opinion on the public domain that the punishment imposed on Ranjan Ramanayaka is a one that goes beyond one that is judicial, one considered as political. Therefore, we have decided to go to Geneva to seek relief on the matter. We made multiple requests from the President, but nothing transpired. We are not going overseas to betray the country. We are doing so to seek justice for Ranjan Ramanayaka.
Opposition leader Sajid Premadasa discussed the dire situations faced by dairy farmers in Ranmi Thanna Thissa Maharama today. He made the following remarks regarding the current situation the country is facing.
The first thing this regime did when they came into power is they gave tax concessions worth 600 to 800 million rupees to the rich and the ultra-rich. This is what caused the dollar crisis in Sri Lanka. Some people ask, what is the SJB going to do if we come into power? We know what the people need. We know how to work for people's well-being. How can we find a solution for the dollar and the fuel crisis? We need to have discussions with international organizations. Have you ever heard of a foreign nation granting a donation to the opposition? The Chinese government issued a grant of 20 million Sri Lankan rupees to the HUSMA program to donate hospital equipment to rural Sri Lanka. It was not a loan. It was a grant. We are not prepared to take any more loans. If we can negotiate grants while being in the opposition, we can definitely get this country out of this mess when we come into power.
Hindu devotees the world over celebrate Mahashivaratri Day today, giving priority to religious observances. We leave you tonight highlighting the importance of this day in the Hindu calendar.
According to Hindu legend, Mahashivaratri marks the day on which Lord Shiva proved that he was the strongest god among all other gods. Hindu beliefs speak of a dispute which arose between Lord Vishnu and Lord Brahma over who the strongest god was, and it is during this moment that Lord Shiva had intervened and produced a great beam of light which bridged the expanse between the ground and the sky. Lord Shiva had spoken to the two gods and told them that whoever is capable of finding the two corners of the beam of light will be the strongest god. Thereby Lord Vishnu transformed into a swine and began digging in search of one corner of the beam of light, while Lord Brahma transformed into a swan and flew off into the sky in search of the other corner. However, both gods were unable to find the corners and they accepted Lord Shiva as the most powerful god. Hindu devotees the world over celebrate this day in remembrance of Lord Shiva and this historic occasion.